It's got to be, how can we help more people? How can we provide more help to more people? It was half the time.
Wow.
So it doesn't sound a lot, but if you extrapolate that again across the entire citizens advice service, that would lead to hundreds of thousands of extra people getting advice, because you're dealing with issues a lot quicker, which frees up capacity of advisors to help more people. You can move faster alone, but you can move further together.
But citizens' advice is, you are 100% affecting people's lives. If you tell someone something and it's not the right thing to tell them,
They're extremely vulnerable, extremely distressed, sometimes extremely frustrated. And the last thing we wanted to do was to add to that with getting them into the stereotypical chatbot loop of hell. Sorry, I didn't understand that. Sorry, I didn't understand that.
So it's like, you might save 50% of handle time. That doesn't mean that 50% of the workforce are gone. That just means you can answer 50% more calls. You can serve 50% more demand. The following is a conversation with Stuart Pearson, who is the head of innovation at Citizens Advice. For those of you that are not in the UK, Citizens Advice is a charity organisation that consists of over 250 regional entities that are all there to give advice to the citizens of the United Kingdom based on the situations they find themselves in. It's all legal advice. You could be going through a divorce, you could be in debt, you could have a neighbourly dispute, all kinds of situations that you need legal advice for. Citizens Advice is there to help. Now, what's really unique about Citizens Advice compared to the vast majority of other organisations or charities is that all it does really, fundamentally, when you boil it down to its core competency, is it offers advice, which is information-based stuff. Prime, fertile ground, you might think, for artificial intelligence or for retrieval augmented generation. And that it is. This conversation with Stuart is all about the creation of Caddy, which is an internal-facing AI assistant that contact center agents can use to ask questions, find information in order to give back to the users. Now, this is a very interesting tale of risk mitigation and slowly but surely, one step at a time, proving value and creating a sustainable AI product that adds real measurable value to the business and stands the test of time. So many organizations and so many people are searching for this silver bullet, and they do not understand that artificial intelligence, when you implement artificial intelligence, you are introducing a new worker into your organization, a digital worker that's going to be alongside your colleagues until the end of time or until you decide to switch it off. That means you need to plan for that properly. You need to involve the right stakeholders. You need to involve your users. You need to have the right philosophy and approach to ethics and guardrails and governance and all of that kind of stuff, all while proving value for the users and proving value for the business. So I speak to Stuart all about this journey and the value that Caddy is bringing, which is actually fundamentally reducing average handle time by 50%. Now, in an organization that deals with over 50 million contacts per year, you can imagine the amount of time that can be saved and therefore the amount of people that can be helped if you can shave your average handle time down by 50%. This is a really interesting conversation, one of how to get your journey right and how to build maturity in the right way and prove value in the right way. Without further ado, this is Stuart Pearson of Citizens Advice. Stuart Pearson, welcome to VUX World, my friend.
Thanks, Kate. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Thank you for joining me. Everything all good?
Yeah, great. Thanks. About yourself?
All good. Thank you. No complaints, no major complaints anyway. Back still causing me some problems. I was supposed to do a half marathon on Sunday and Friday put my back out. Saturday couldn't move. Sunday didn't do the half marathon. So yeah. Everyone thinks it's an excuse, but it's a genuine issue.
That's your story.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I tell myself. So yeah, but all good. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Appreciate that. I come across, literally by chance, it was a LinkedIn Live that was happening. Forgive me, I forget the person who was doing it, but I literally turned it on and you were in the middle of talking about the work that you've been doing at Citizens Advice and your experimentations with AI and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, this sounds like a really good use case, really good success story that I think others would really benefit from learning from. I didn't catch the beginning part. I kind of caught it sort of like midstream. So I thought maybe let's reach out and let's try and see if we can get into it. So I appreciate you spending the time with us.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, happy to share our story and hopefully people get value from it.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe it might be worth starting from the beginning. So for those listeners and viewers in the US, of which there is quite a number, might be worth just explaining firstly what Citizens Advice is in the UK. I'm assuming there's probably something similar in the US, but like, what is citizens' advice? What's the role of citizens' advice, and what's your role within that organization?
Yeah, so Citizens Advice is a non-profit that provides free advice to citizens. That's free, confidential, impartial, and independent. That could be on anything. So it ranges from issues around people in money troubles, people with housing troubles, relationship troubles. Citizens Advice is kind of the first port of call. The way the charity works is it's a federated charity. So essentially, there is the National Citizens Advice, which is the umbrella organisation, and then sitting underneath that, there's around 250 independent citizens advice across England and Wales, and they support millions of people each year with problems they face. So it's essentially free legal advice. And my role, I work within one of those 250 local offices. So I work within the Greater Manchester region of England. My role is head of innovation. So looking at how we can use primarily technology to help us deliver on our mission.
Fantastic. And quite a wide mission, that as well, in terms of like legal advice could be absolutely anything, presumably. It's like, if somebody's being overcharged by a utilities provider, or maybe they're going through a divorce, or they're in debt, or like there's all kinds of areas in which kind of like citizens' advice comes into play. As you're beginning to think about the problems that you have and then how technology might solve it, like where do you start from identifying those problems? Like, because rather than a hammer looking for a nail, which AI can often be, how do you kind of assess what or quantify the problem that you're facing and that then led to an AI proposal, essentially?
I think, I mean, you're right in terms of the scope of the issues that people present. So you could have somebody presenting with an eviction, and the next person could be presenting with a neighbour's overhanging tree in their garden. So it's the full gamut of problems people face, and 100% it's using technology should never be solutions looking for a problem. However, probably lucky is the wrong word, but sense of ice, we've got a lot of problems. So it's very easy to think about a solution, thinking, well, actually, that could help us with X, Y, and Z. And I think one of the challenges that I think a lot of nonprofits have is because essentially we're a free service, we're very popular. A lot of people approach us, and our challenge is how do we meet that demand? And the the UK has been suffering the last couple of years with a cost of living crisis, which meant demand for our services has never been higher. So I've been working within Citizens Advice for 2 decades now, and I've never known anything as the issues we're facing at the moment in terms of demand. And not only the demand for advice is higher than it's ever been, the range of channels that people want to reach out to us is more diverse than it's ever been, and the complexity of the issues they're presenting, again, it is a challenge. So it was from that perspective, we were thinking, well, but I mean, just a bit of background is, so Citizens Advice, like I say, it's a national charity. So the national website gets about 52 million um, visits a year from unique users, which gives you
Wow.
kind of a sense of the scale of demand that the service has. And Citizens Advice traditionally is thought of as a face-to-face service. It's kind of our primary kind of USP. We have kind of ways to access us, whether that's venues or working out of other locations where people can come in face to face. But obviously things have changed, and demand for telephone advice is huge. But there's obviously this new cohort of clients that they're digital first clients, and it's how do we reach out to those? And I think one of the challenges this go back to 2019. One of the issues we identified was clients trying to access the national web chat platform, which is only available when there's advisors available,
Hmm.
which means it's often not available because advisors, the priority is the person knocking on the door rather than the digital client coming through the virtual door. So we were looking at how could we provide a better digital offer to those clients. And kind of back in, you probably know this, Kane, but back in kind of 2018, 19, it was the first wave of chatbots and how chatbots were going to solve everything. It was Facebook's big F8 conference. And we definitely saw an opportunity there, thinking, could we use a chatbot to kind of filter out some of that, triage some of those early clients? Could we get out some of those simple queries get them out of the queue. So it frees us up to help those with more complex clients with more complex issues. So within Greater Manchester, we did a proof of concept, developed a chatbot using Google's Dialogflow, built out conversation flows, mapped it out based on advisors, kind of what questions advisors would ask to try and triage a client. And what we identified back in 2019 was one, advice is really complex, and that clients often don't know what their issue is, so it's hard to triage them with kind of the conversation flows that were available then. Um, so we did some early work. We got some wins, so we got about a 10% success rate of clients getting the answers they needed through the chatbot, which is obviously, if you extrapolate that again to that 52 million people trying to access the website, then that could have a huge impact. But again, we weren't confident of clients getting the answer they needed, and also that handover to clients who didn't get the answer they needed. How do you hand them seamlessly over to a human advisor when again resources were at a premium? So we kind of parked that and patted ourselves on the back for thinking differently, but thought we'll revisit that when technology changes. And then again, you've probably heard this a lot on the podcast, but obviously November 2022 was that kind of watershed moment where you thought, oh, ChatGPT launches, the the NLP stuff we've been playing with back in 2019. It was night and day between what obviously the LLMs could do now. So we definitely thought let's go back and revisit that.
And when you said going back to revisit it, was it that that initial chatbot didn't see the light of day, or it did see the light of day, but then you pulled it back and took it offline, or was it just kind of still online, but it was kind of just doing what it was doing, sort of thing?
Yeah, so the initial one, we did internal testing using natural language understanding as it was then, and when it worked, it was like magic, but it rarely worked. And what we didn't want is, again, the nature of our service is we get people approaching us who are extremely vulnerable, extremely distressed, sometimes extremely frustrated. And the last thing we wanted to do was to add to that with getting them into the stereotypical chatbot loop of hell. "Oh, sorry, I didn't understand that. Sorry, I didn't understand that." So when we launched the chatbot to the public, again, this was a local proof of concept. We kind of fell down the button route and thought, let's just go down buttons so people will press what their issue is, and then we'll navigate them to the appropriate self-help page, because we just didn't have the confidence that the natural language was where we needed it to be. Um, so we just kind of parked there really, where it was a very simple button FAQ bot, which would often just trip over to the public website and say, "Here's the answer." Just really kind of guiding people to the page they wanted on the website, and that's kind of where we left it really.
Mm. And so it sounds as though you're going through a very similar journey to many companies. And we spoke to Sarah Hyder from Salzburg AG, who is a telco company in Austria recently, and they kind of went through this very similar process. They had an NLU chatbot. It was doing reasonably well, but it was not covering the breadth that it wanted to cover. Because I think the challenge, the realistic challenge with NLU systems, the machine learning systems, is that they are very much predicated on users understanding what their issue is and being able to explain very succinctly what their actual issue is. Whereas definitely that's not going to be the case for citizens advice, because they're far more likely to describe their situation rather than the need that they have. And it's up to you, presumably, to understand what their situation means and then therefore the advice that they need, which I suppose adds a layer of complexity for what the AI thing can do, because it's going to require that requires a pretty skilled human in the first place. So how do you start thinking about the role of AI in an area which can be pretty complex and very wide ranging?
Uh, I mean, you're 100% on there. I mean, because again, going back to that early pilot we did, when we did some kind of internal testing where we essentially had the chatbot, but we had a human there as well. So that the client would ask a question, and then we had a human advisor who could obviously interject. What you would get is a wall of text, from the client, which is basically like a brain dump of their issues, and very much what you were saying. Clients often don't know what the problem is, or they present with a housing issue is actually a money issue, or it could be a relationship issue. And you definitely get doing the work we did. I got an added kind of appreciation of the skills of our advisors to be able to tease out the correct information that you need from a client. So when we thought about revisiting that chatbot using AI, the first thing we thought is we weren't confident at that moment that this could be front facing. This couldn't be client facing at the moment because the risks of potentially getting it wrong for the client. So, I mean, again, this is probably something you've heard of. Again, is anybody doing this work at the moment with particularly Gen AI, any kind of knowledge based LLM, is that we're holding this to a much higher standard than we hold our human advisors. In the fact that it can't get it wrong once because the reputational risk on the organization and the potential detriment to a client if it was to be if the person was to be misadvised is huge. So we thought there's huge opportunities here, but if we were going to do AI responsibly, we should do this internally. So the idea was to again, going back to your point of looking at issues, one of the issues we've got is we have a process within Citizens Advice with telephone digital clients where an advisor might not know the answer. So rather than they'll kind of put the client on a hold, or if it's in a digital chat, then they will ping a supervisor, say, I've got this client, they've got this issue, I think it's this, is that right? Or have you got any help? Which is obviously a great way of doing it. But what we were finding is because, like I said, demand for advice is higher than it's ever been, and people's issues are more complex, is demand for those supervisors was growing and growing, which was mean the response time from the supervisor getting a message, replying to the advisor, for the advisor then to pass that information back onto the client was growing, which means obviously one, it's not a great experience for the client, but also it means that potentially we're missing helping another person because we're taking longer on that conversation than we should do. So we thought, here's a way we could inject a chatbot in this situation to act as a supervisor. So we kind of back in mid 2023, we developed an internal chatbot using OpenAI's APIs that the advisor would ask the AI chatbot supervisor first. The chatbot would go away, look at the answer, come back, present the answer to the advisor and the supervisor would then validate it through initially because we're using Google Chat within Google Workspace, just an emoticon thumbs up, thumbs down for the prototype. And then the advisor knew if it's got a thumbs up, I'm happy with the answer, I can give that answer to the to the client. So again, it was putting guardrails in place really, and again because I think because we're a non-profit, it was thinking of it through the lens of the client and making sure we get the best outcome for the client. So it was trying to mitigate all those potential risks.
Mm.
So kind of the first red line was clients will always speak to a human advisor, and that any answer that the AI generates would get human oversight. You'd have that human in the loop process.
Interesting. That's a really interesting way of going about it, and I suppose that that's a good way that many organisations have taken as well, which is the same, which is that rather than kind of have to deal with the risks associated with publishing something on the front end that's facing the end customer and risk getting that wrong, and there's been many horror stories there, starting out internally. But it sounds as though even starting out internally, you've took a fairly kind of like cautious approach, which is let's begin by just trying to surface the information, but then let's put people in the process so that it's being checked all the while. How did you manage that though? Because at the very beginning, if you're going to have supervisors give it the okay, presumably then, you've only got so many supervisors, presumably far less supervisors than you have kind of frontline agents, and therefore how do you make sure that the supervisors are available to approve the content and still not slow down the delivery of the content to the agent? How did you approach kind of rolling it out, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of jumped over an important stage in the design process. Is that when we thought this is what we wanted to do, and we had an idea, is before a line of code was written, we sat down with advisors and supervisors and said, "This is what we're thinking of doing. What do you think? This is what we thought of. What haven't we thought of?" So obviously getting them involved, obviously it's kind of transformation 101, get
Mm.
buy-in from the users, but also, again, just sense checking, this is what we're thinking. Have we missed anything? And one of the things that was raised is this tool is great, but if it takes off, you're just going to make the existing problem we've got even worse because people will be using it. But what we and obviously that was something that when we were doing the initial pilots, we were very conscious of. But the way it's been used is the way the supervisor would have been used. So essentially, you don't create additional demand; you're just reducing the time in the response time. So I'll kind of touch on that later because after the initial pilot, because again, one of the things we did, and again, you'll have probably heard this many times on the podcast, is to improve the accuracy of the responses from the AI solution. We used RAG, retrieval augmented generation, to reduce the information sources that it would go to. So we restricted it to kind of the Citizens Advice website initially, because obviously that's our trusted information that only go to there. Because we're using OpenAI's API, we reduce the temperature down to reduce creativity on it, again, to improve accuracy and reduce the risk of hallucinations. So you're adding, obviously, safety measures on safety measures, really. And again, that's the sense of the kind of how risk averse we are as a charity. But we definitely found that supervisors found it a lot easier. So rather than having to either type the answer into a chatbot or a chat box or to go away and research the information themselves, it was already presented to them. All they needed to do was give it a scan, give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or we then added in the option for additional comments where they might put in some information that the bot didn't have access to, maybe some local information about maybe a local authority might have some additional support. So it was going really well, and then National Citizens Advice, again, because we're a federated network, they've been approached by the Cabinet Office. So the UK government were looking at AI projects, and they spun up a brand new team that is now the incubator for AI team. And they reached out to Citizens Advice and said, "Have you got any AI kind of pilots you're working on that we could support with?" National Citizens Advice said, "No, we haven't, but we know somebody who has," and they reached out to us. So from the tail end of 2023 and all the way through 2024, we've been working with the AI team. So the developer, the brains behind what is now called Caddy, has been working with that team to continuously improve it. And as part of that, we did an evaluation with 6 offices across the UK to validate the assumptions we made were true. Does it improve accuracy? Does it help speed up the process? And will it unlock more capacity to help more people?
So maybe it'd be interesting we'll get to that point in terms of like, did it reduce capacity?
Yeah.
Did it have an impact? But maybe we'll back up slightly. So you've identified the the need there. You're beginning in a kind of like internal, I suppose, controlled fashion, which is that starting internally, having humans in the loop, having supervisors approve content. But even before you get to that place, you've got some work to be done there in terms of what content should go into this thing. How did you approach identifying, what this thing should actually do? Because as I said, and we've spoke about before, you've got a vast amount of topic areas. Presumably, you've got a vast amount of content available online, probably a vast amount of content available internally in various knowledge bases, etc. Where did you start from the perspective of what content needs to go into this thing?
The primary information source that our advisors use is the Citizens Advice information. So the Citizens Advice website, and then on the back end there is an internal information knowledge base that advisors use. So we use those. Now advisors do use other information sources, but for our initial pilot, we just focused on that because we thought, well, that is information that we know we can trust. We know that's information that is kept up to date. That in terms of our kind of from an insurance point of view, in terms of giving advice, that we be compliant because we're getting information off that site, and we were willing to take a hit on the amount of validation supervisors would get because obviously you're limiting yourself. We're willing to take a hit on the success rate of the kind of thumbs up from supervisors by having the comfort of knowing that information is trusted sources, and there is no risk of you're using a website that's out of date and that information goes, the supervisor doesn't check it properly, gives it a thumbs up, and then the client gets misinformation. So we kind of restricted ourselves to kind of the trusted source, which was the Citizens Advice brand.
Yeah. And then in terms of how you go about constructing that RAG system, there's been lots of different ways that you can do that, obviously, but the kind of two questions are, Um, we've seen it done, for example, with Millennium Bank, where they actually don't generate responses; they just retrieve content. Other companies do that, where they'll retrieve content from likely multiple places, and then they'll create summaries, and they'll use generative AI to create those summaries. Um, how did you sort of approach it? Did you use pure retrieval, or did you also use retrieval and then generation?
Yeah, so we wanted to replicate the supervisor experience as close as possible. So we did use full RAG. So there is retrieval, and then there is obviously it generates it into English. So the advisor, as if it was a supervisor, respond, "This is what you should do for a client." But also within that, you've got hyperlinks to the information sources that it's using to ensure that when you copy and paste that over, that you're able to check that that is accurate information based on the website. So there is RAG, but again, we've got that extra layer in there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, what has the impact been then? Since I mean, this went live a while ago, but maybe let's talk about what the central government might be doing and where it's gone since then. But since kind of going live, let's talk initially, first kind of like few weeks. What was it looking like, and then what's the situation today?
Yes. So initially, the feedback from advisors was this is great and it really helps us. That was we got a positive response from supervisors because obviously it was helping reducing their workload. Then when we went to do the pilot with the 6 offices, where we had like an independent evaluation through the cabinets team, um, we were able to say that Caddy was getting 80% success rate. So 80% of the responses that Caddy was generating, which is what was the AI solution got named, didn't require any additional information from the supervisor. Again, 80%, some of that, the 20% is because of the decisions we've made in terms of restricting the information sources. So when we did start working with the Cabinet Office, we included gov.uk. So then we had two huge kind of information banks, which helped us improve the amount of information that Caddy could access. But we still know, obviously, speak to advisors, that there's some websites that they would use, and this is interesting, and it'd be interesting to hear if other people have raised it. Obviously, it's just that ethical side then of, well, we could go away and kind of scrape Shelter's website, but ethically, that's not our information, that's Shelter's. And if we wanted that information, I think it'd be a conversation we'd have with them as a partner. So at the moment, we're still restricting ourselves to the Citizens Advice website and gov.uk. So the success rate was kind of 80%. And in terms of the time to take from a human advisor asking a human supervisor was around 10 minutes. With Caddy, it took about 5 minutes. So that's the full process. That's from the advisor posting the question, Caddy going away, getting the answer, and the supervisor validating it. It was half the time.
Wow.
So it doesn't sound a lot, but if you extrapolate that again across the entire citizens advice service, which is the ambition that we scale it out nationally, that would lead to hundreds of thousands of extra people getting advice because you're dealing with issues a lot quicker, which frees up capacity of advisors to help more people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about the website traffic there. What, 250
Yeah,
million? Do you say something like that?
52
52.
million.
52 million.
Yeah,
So, a good portion of those are going to phone, or, there's
yeah.
a good portion of unknown demand that doesn't hit the website but does phone instead. And so it's kind of like, yeah, reducing handle time by 50% is huge.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the kind of other things that it gave was it improved confidence for newer advisors, so trainees. So trainees were because the way you speak to candidates within a private chat before it's sent it to the supervisor, rather than a kind of used to be a shared workspace where you would post questions to supervisors. So for trainees, it was. I think people had that kind of imposter syndrome, thinking I should know the answer to this. I shouldn't need to ask a supervisor. But having kind of Caddy as that trusted intermediary, let them build their confidence up, so they were happier to ask questions earlier on. So there was some kind of unintended benefits that we didn't realise. But the feedback from advisors was really positive, throughout the pilot.
That's really good, that. And that's a perfect fit, really, because citizens' advice is exactly that. It's advice, isn't it? So it's all information based. Is there any things that citizen advice will do in terms of like service provision type of thing, like any more sort of like transactional type of things, or is it all advice?
Yeah, so it's all advice. Obviously with kind of inside baseball, there's different levels of advice. We've got kind of different tiers of advice. So there'd be like tier one is very quick one-off pieces of information, and tier two is more information where maybe you might ring a third party on behalf of a client, and then you've got kind of the kind of the gold standard, which is where your casework, where you've got like a dedicated caseworker where you've got an ongoing issue that might last for weeks or sometimes months. So there's different levels of advice, but again, you can see where solutions like Caddy could be a massive benefit.
Yeah. Okay. So there is that. So it's not purely just potentially for some. It's not just a question answer and then you're done. It's this case management and all that kind of stuff going on as well.
Yeah.
So presumably then you've got Caddy is working seemingly really successfully on the back end, which is involved in the conversation, if you like, but the agents are responsible for or kind of like extracting information from it. Avenues that you could potentially see it going further in future, obviously providing accuracy, etc., is reasonable. Then you've potentially got one way, which is potentially surfacing that on the front end. The another thing is that can you also apply similar technologies across that whole case management lifecycle to then see whether you can do the same kind of thing? I mean, if you could reduce like case handle time to the same extent as you've managed to reduce average handle time on the calls, that's huge,
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you pick up on very early on, I mean, even with our first ever pilot, was the power of asking good questions. So that kind of advisors being good at asking prompts, because the way we built Caddy, the flow essentially it's a one-shot solution. So it's basically you ask the question, Caddy gives the answer. So that prompt was so important that the advisor put as much context and information into that question in order for Caddy to get a better answer. What we're going to do with a kind of V2 is that when the advisor asks the question, Caddy will do follow-up questions to say, before I go away, could you just clarify these things? And just ask, which is what a supervisor would do.
know?
And again, you would improve that. So there's definitely opportunities there. One of the things that we asked for from advisors was for more experienced advisors saying, I'd love to use Caddy, but I don't need a supervisor. I just want it to help me do a search of all those websites. So a kind of super search. But in order to still have that human in loop process, could we have a kind of self-approval button? So you've still got the
Mm.
audit trail that a human has given the approval of this advice, but they've not needed to go through a supervisor. They've done it themselves. So that is, again, that's on the roadmap as another thing we want to use, Caddy.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I suppose it's a step by step thing, isn't it? So the first step is kind of like getting it up and running. It's being used by approved by supervisors. If you can get that to a level where supervisors are very, very, very rarely saying that this is wrong, then you kind of remove that sense check. But then you'll have other guardrails in place through your prompt chains and stuff like that. But then you also
Yeah.
then you can have it such that the more experienced people are kind of responsible for approving their own content. And then if that gets to a certain degree of accuracy that you're happy with, then maybe you open that up to everybody. And if that gets to a certain degree of accuracy, then you can, step by step by step, you can see how you can easily roll this out. But it's really interesting and refreshing actually to kind of hear. I mean, you started this in 2023, it sounds like, and in 2025, you're still kind of, I suppose, cautiously, step by step, just one step at a time. And so, what we always say to people is essentially that this whole thing is a journey. Your experience with AI is a journey. You're essentially building effectively digital workers who are going to exist in your company till the end of time, basically. That is now your company from now on. So Caddy is now part of your company, part of your organization. It's working alongside your colleagues. It's not going to go anywhere. It's only going to get better than that. So you have to view it as a journey. You have to view it as the first thing you do as your first step. And then it's about how do you sustainably scale it from there. And I think there's a massive temptation with the vast majority of organizations, which is we just want AI to solve everything now. And maybe I think sometimes they try and either bite off more than they can chew, which means they get stuck in this whole land of proof of concept forever, or they try and kind of like rush things a little bit, which is that they don't understand that it's a journey and it's going to be something that's going to exist for a long time. They kind of want to get results in the next 3 months. So I'm just curious about kind of like, is that a conscious thing that you've done, is to adopt a more long term philosophy with this kind of stuff, or is that just the way that it's manifested?
I, I think some of it has been the nature of working with the Cabinet Office. I think things do slow down when government are involved for good reasons. But I do think there is something to that around, again, some of it, some of the benefits of Caddy and the success of it was the model really, where you had kind of a smaller organization does the innovation, and then so like they're the startup, and then you work with the national and the cabinet as a scale up partner. And I think it is that kind of phrase of, you can move faster alone, but you can move further together. So we were able to do the quick get down and dirty, do the proof of concept, prove that it works, it's got buy-in, and then work with the national partner to like you say, do more kind of a steady approach of this works. Let's keep kicking the tires as we go along and make sure of it. But we've definitely got a roadmap of things we want to do, and because the obvious one is, again, going back to that 2019, could we have something that's client facing? And at the moment, probably not, because we're not where we'd like to be with Caddy internally, but that's definitely where you want to get to. And again, you could still have a human in the loop in that. You could have it where Caddy goes away, gets the answer, but presents the answer to an advisor first before it's pushed out to a client. But I mean, I think I'd like to move a bit quicker. But again, that caution, that risk aversion that we've got allows us to keep progressing. I think because we know where we want to get to, and it's just one step at a time. I think that's the way we've kind of taken it. And I think there is. I mean, I've seen that phrase that FOMO is not a strategy. And I think, yeah, we could rush something out. We could rush a client-facing chatbot out, but the risk to the client is huge, and the reputational risk to Citizens Advice, it's been around since 1939. So you know, if you were to go out and get it wrong, the headlines and the impact, and the part of the brand is trust. People trust to come to us.
Mm.
If we were to create something that wasn't ready for the public yet, the impact, could be detrimental for the charity.
Yeah. And I think that the difference, I think, between some of the use cases that, we've all seen in terms of like Chrysler and DPD and all that kind of stuff, it's that, you know, the users and customers of those organizations are a lot more transient. And for example, with DPD, you don't actually even choose whether or not you use DPD in many cases. The retailer that you buy from is the one that decides what distributor it uses. And like, there was issues with like the Air Canada one and stuff like that. And it's kind of like all these things that they're bad for the brand, but they're not ultimately really affecting people's lives. But citizens' advice is you are 100% affecting people's lives. If you tell someone something and it's not the right thing to tell them and they get themselves in a bunch of legal, turmoil and emotional, financial, and all kinds of trouble that could potentially happen if you guide them in the wrong direction. So it's like, it's not an understatement to say that it's a very highly important service that you don't want to get wrong.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, again, when we were developing Caddy, when we do any innovation, it's always client first. The value has to be to the client, not to the organization. It's got to be, how can we help more people? How can we provide more help to more people? So yeah, I think that's really kind of informed the kind of ethical, responsible design choices we made has all been determined by that.
Mm. And what do you think would be some of the challenges that perhaps you might have faced during the creation of this solution that others may face as they're starting to adopt these generative technologies? What kind of tips or advice would you have for overcoming some of those challenges?
I think some of it would be being as open, as honest with your teams and workforce, that you're doing these things, because there's a lot of fear around job displacement, that these are going to replace you. And I think it is, and I know it's an overused phrase, but we definitely said this is about augmenting your job, not replacing your job. This is about making your job easier, and the power of Citizens Advice is that human to human connection, and can we unlock more capacity for advisors to spend more time with clients, using AI rather than having AI kind of replace advisors. Because I think, again, going back to the nature of people's problems, for some digital first clients, that might be a great solution, but for others, that isn't going to be a solution. So it's how we can use AI to unlock human capacity to help more people for that. Because the emotive skills our advisors have about being able to relay complex information to somebody who's upset, vulnerable, you know, frustrated, angry is so important. At the moment, AI is not going to replace that skill anytime soon. So, can we use AI though to unlock capacity for them to do that?
Yeah. And I think that's what it is. AI fundamentally is a productivity tool. And I think that those that are talking about AI replacing jobs and all that kind of stuff, I mean, for one, I've never really seen that happen anyway. And all it means is that if you are going to end up getting rid of people, it just means that you just don't have enough stuff for them to do, which means that your business is probably not heading in the right direction anyway. You know, we had Jacob Nielsen on the podcast recently, and one of the things he said is that basically, like, we seem to have this notion that there is a finite amount of work to be done, but that's actually not the case and has never been the case. So it's like, you know, you might save 50% of handle time, as you've kind of just, you know, proven with your use case. That doesn't mean that 50% of the workforce are gone. That just means you can answer 50% more calls. You can serve 50% more demand. It's a productivity booster, a productivity enhancer, not something I do not think whatsoever, in whether it's in the call center or elsewhere. I don't see AI as being a displacement kind of technology. I think it's a productivity enhancer, and the work fills up the available time. And if you can get more work done within that time because you can use tools to do things more effectively, then you're going to be more productive. You're going to scale better. You're going to provide better services, and so on and so on and so on. You know.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, for me, every client who rings up and doesn't get through to an advisor is a client we failed. And demand for our services is just through the roof at the moment. So any solution that you can do to help this. And another thing that we did, because again, going back to that kind of ethical, responsible design, is we obviously involved our advisors, we involved our supervisors. It's like, how do we involve our clients, our kind of the people coming towards us? And we were really lucky that Manchester Metropolitan University had been doing a project called a People's Panel for AI, which is a panel of regular people who've had a boot camp from Manchester Met University on what AI is and what it isn't. And then you get to kind of Dragon's Den present your solutions. So we presented Caddy to the people's panel and said, this is what we've built. These are the decisions we've made. Are you happy with that? Would you be happy that our advisors are using this tool when they're helping you? Is there anything we've not thought of? And it was great for us to get that kind of seal of approval that the people's panel were like, oh, she's brilliant. And, everything you've done is what we'd want. So it was a great way to kind of, for us to complete the loop that everybody who's going to be impacted positively by Caddy has had a kind of say in the design.
I'm glad to hear you talk about design so often and so frequently, because many times this thing is seen as an engineering problem. And I was saying there was a person from IBM, quite a notable person there, mentioned something on LinkedIn the other week about AI is 5% AI and 95% engineering. And I was like, so 0% design then. And it's kind of like, everybody seems to just think that this whole thing is an engineering problem, that there's no users at all and that there's no experience being had whatsoever. Whereas the reality is that that's all it is. You're distilling services and content and consumption. You're distilling it down into conversations, and that's all you're doing. So the only thing that matters in conversation is the interface. That's all there is. That's all you have is the interaction between you and the person. It's all boiled down to language. So not having design involved in that is an absolute cardinal sin. And not having the end user involved in that is breaking one of the fundamental rules of design. So it's kind of like, yeah, it just seems to me as though there is a big gap in the way that many organizations are approaching it. So I'm definitely enthused to hear how you've been inclusive, you've included the users, you've included the stakeholders that are going to be using it as well. Presumably you've thought about the kind of experience and how it kind of actually functions and works and stuff like that. So it's really good story.
Yeah, I think just with the obviously the work with the cabinet office. I mean, that obviously they've embraced Caddy, the government, and they're looking at how they could use it. And again, going back to your kind of just what you were saying, then obviously they've got like kind of top class engineers, and they're looking for ways to make it better on the back end. Again, we were a tiny team. We built a kind of proof of concept, so they've done some amazing work. But what they love about Caddy is the design and process choices we've made in terms of, the human in the loop processes. That's the bits that they've loved, the design choices rather than the engineering choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And what ends up happening often is that once you've got a degree of experience with artificial intelligence, you can see it working, you prove the concept, you know there's value there. It then starts to kind of give you a whole bunch of ideas, some of which we've kind of spoke about, which is, does it end up being public customer facing? Does it end up getting into case management and stuff like that? Are there any other areas in which you've been leveraging AI since the launch of Caddy?
Yeah, I think because I've been around the block a while, to do an MVP that takes off, and obviously it's garnered so much interest, and obviously now potentially it could be used, within the government. We thought, well, we definitely proved that there's value to AI, and if we do it the way we've done it, there's opportunities. What are the other pain points? And one of the big pain points for Citizens Advice as a charity is, for every client we see, we have to make case notes about that client. So that is one. If the client comes back in, the next advisor knows what happened, but also from a legal perspective, that the information we've given to the client, there's a record of it in case that client was misadvised. We've got hard copy. Now, obviously, there's reasons we've done that, but what that does is impacts on the amount of people we can help, because you've got this admin task that's involved in the process, and it is unfortunately about 50% of the work is admin when they're doing these case notes. So it's always been a pain point. So looking at the work that's been going around case note automation, we thought, is there a way we could use Gen AI to help with this process? So we're about 6 months into another proof of concept, which is, at the moment it's called Note Genie. That's just a working title, but essentially it does transcription either from a live face-to-face interview or a telephone call. The interaction with the client's consent, obviously, between the client and the advisor, does a transcription, then uses AI to convert that transcription into our case notes, which are quite structured. This is how you have to do a case note. And then using AI, also scores that case note for quality and flags any issues that might have been missed through the session. So again, it's really exciting, and obviously Caddy's been great, but the buzz around this potential solution from the Citizens Advice network is huge, because of all advisors, it's not something they enjoy doing, case notes. So if you could remove that pain point, again, you would just be unlocking so much capacity to help more people.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's kind of like, I've been a bit kind of critical in the past about summarization and disposition code generation and stuff like that. And I've kind of called it's low hanging fruit in some sense, but when you really think about it, it's using AI, or at least it's using large language models for, in part, what their kind of strengths are, basically. Like the risk around generative AI is in the areas that we've spoke about, which is the generation part. If you want to have things that are facing your customers, that's kind of where you're introducing risk. But they are really good at summarizing. They're really good at analyzing, extracting, and stuff like that. And generally kind of understanding language. And in there is far less risk, because you're given it. You can even do that in context in a prompt. You don't have to have like mad sophisticated pipelines. You can literally do it within the context of the prompt. And so it's kind of like it's yeah. I always get kind of like, I don't know. I suppose a little bit kind of. I'm probably guilty and hypocritical of those people I was talking about earlier on, which is like gung ho with AI. It's got to do everything. It's got to do it all tomorrow. And I'm probably a bit guilty of that sometimes, because I see all the potential and I see how it can be really transformative. And then I've been very critical in the past about the case note stuff and the disposition code stuff. But over the last kind of like 9 or 10 months or so, I've kind of got a bit of a renewed appreciation for it, because it's solving an actual problem. It can have an impact on your ability to serve more people. And it is actually using AI for what it is good for. And also, really, the lift to make it happen is not actually a massively great lift. Now, you might have a lift in getting the extra 20% of accuracy out of it. You might have a bit of work to be done there in terms of like making this a bulletproof thing. But to get it off the ground and to get it out there to start learning from it, it does actually, yes, it meets the 3 criteria really, which is the technology ready? Is there a sufficient business problem? And is there sufficient user acceptance? And I suppose it kind of meets all 3 of those things.
Yeah, and for us, one of the other benefits has been, because it's going off the transcription of the actual interaction between the client and the advisor. Those case notes are more, um, a more accurate representation of what actually happened. Whereas at the moment, case notes are based on the reflection of the advisor,
Mm.
their memory of what happened in that in the session with the client. So for us, it's a lot more accurate. And again, what value is it to the client? The case note, the client's been and gone. They've had the advice. Again, if they're coming back, there is value to it. But for the majority of clients, that case note doesn't really serve any value to them. It's more for us, for our internal kind of quality audit processes. So if you can automate that and free up that advisor again to do what they want to do is help people, not do admin.
Yeah. Really good lean process design there. Get rid of the non-value add. Yeah, I like that. I like it. Wicked. Well, Stuart, this has been very, very interesting. I really appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing your story and your success. It's been really, really good. Really great to see, successful deployments. Really good to get an insight in terms of the journey. And I think that's probably one of the more valuable pieces for people who haven't done anything with AI yet, or maybe they've got some machine learning solutions, they're looking to move into some more generative kind of space. I think it's a really good kind of story to say you don't have to fight the world and solve it overnight. It's a journey, and you've got to start by proving value, and every single step that you take has to be rooted in value for the end user. And over that period of time, you can go from an idea to a proof of concept to an MVP to now, in your case, scaling across central government to millions of users. So it's a really, really good story and a good blueprint for everyone else to follow that is in a similar situation. So thank you.
Thanks, Kane.
And thank you all for tuning in. Really appreciate it. I'll hope to see you again on the next one. I would have the schedule open, but I don't. But there'll be another one coming thick and fast, and it's going to be just as good as this one. Thank you all very much. See you soon. Bye now.